Hi, this is Wade Frazier. This is November 6th, 2025 at 4:39 p.m. So I'm going to talk about organized suppression in this video. And organized suppression is a reality, which unfortunately I lived through more than once. In fact, it's a genuine, let's call it conspiracy theory, but it's actually a conspiracy fact. And um, and it's a very multifaceted issue, and I'm going to cover some of that in this video. The day I met Dennis Lee in 1986, he had a bodyguard because of all the death threats that he had. And he actually survived a murder attempt at his home. And one of the corporate hitmen who were sicked on Dennis's company, he died in June, and I named him. Name's Bill Delp. And anyway, this guy worked for the electric companies, and in fact, he was responsible for the death of one of Dennis's employees. And that actually was what really radicalized Dennis in his journey, his energy journey. And the thing is that when you see organized suppression, you never meet Mr. Big, you only meet the minions, And so in Seattle, the organized suppression didn't become evident. In fact, Dennis didn't know what was going on, who was behind it, but no bank in the Seattle area would touch him. And he had this incredible marketing plan, putting the world's best heating system on people's homes for free. Still the most brilliant, benevolent business strategy I ever saw. What happened in Seattle, Dennis, it was the biggest run ever made to bring alternative energy to the American marketplace. And Dennis had to actually leave the area, Seattle, to find a banker. He found one in Spokane. And as with the chairman of the board of American Express, John Spickard, who was the owner of this finance company in Spokane, he understood the genius of what Dennis was doing, and few people can. And this is a constant around geniuses. And I've spent a lot of time around geniuses, and it's like, in fact, what was a famous quote? When a genius appears on the scene, because the dunces are in confederation against him. And I've seen this repeatedly. And so, Dennis, the whole thing about putting on people's homes for free and then only paying for energy savings, it wasn't going for the quick capitalist kill. So businessmen didn't really understand somebody not going for the quick capitalist kill. And so they couldn't understand it. But then it started becoming, evidently so successful that I witnessed dozens of attempts to steal our companies from us. And they were successful a number of times. And in fact, and when the thieves finished stealing the company, the first thing they discarded was Dennis's crazy marketing plans. And this is the idiocy of the business world, which I have seen up close and personal quite a bit. I don't think I've seen anything very unusual. And so the electric companies were behind. They actually unmasked themselves eventually and publicly called Dennis's company a scam, called for an attorney general investigation, which they did, which was, again, totally gangster activity by the officials. And so, incredibly corrupt official. In fact, the hatchet lady at the attorney general's office, her conscience actually got to her, and she quit. And in fact, she was probably the best of all the hitmen and women sicked on Dennis's company over the years. She might have been the best of them. But she was disbarred several years ago for looting over $100,000 from one of her clients' accounts. And she was the best of them. And so, anyway, in Seattle, it wasn't just the attorney general and Bill Delp, and then the banks treated him like he had the plague. Federal Bankruptcy Court, the media, the smears, lied about him, OSHA and other agencies. It was a full court press to wipe out the threat of the world's best heating system. And this was my introduction to to the energy industry, was witnessing the final blows that this company were dealt with. And then Mormon grifters ended up stealing both the Seattle and Ventura companies. And many years later, I heard Stephen Greer say that the Mormon financial empire was the ringleader of the global elite that suppresses free energy, et cetera. And that was isn't that interesting moments in my life hearing that. And so In fact, Dennis found out that the Warman Financial Empire was the biggest investor in Washington's electric company. So Dennis was in the lion's den and didn't know it. Uh, and so anyway, so that was an introduction to organized suppression, and all these pieces. And it's sort of like when the bullets are coming at you from 20 directions at once, it's legitimate to wonder if somebody's orchestrating those salvos. In Stephen Greer's Lost Century movie, which came out a couple of years ago, he listed 9 tactics of organized suppression. And only one of them, national security orders, that's the only one I was not intimately familiar with. I had lived through almost all of these. And I'm actually going to give a brief review of that here in this video. And so the first one Greer named was called block shelving, which is buying out technologies and shelving them. And again, I've written about this, talked about this, where the global elite admitted to Greer over 30 years ago that they had paid out $100 billion in these kind of buyouts, which is, I'm sure, at least doubled by now. So probably $250 billion has been spent on buying out disruptive technologies. And again, and Bot was, a few months after becoming Dennis's partner in Boston, we got the $10 million offer, which is the standard friendly buyout offer. And then a year later, Dennis got the $1 billion offer from the CIA. And in fact, one of my fellow colleagues who worked at the Justice Department told me a classic story on that subject with a guy with a 100-mile-per-gallon carburetor, and how the Justice Department, all they did was ensure that he got a much better deal. So the deal went up by 100 times. Again, just like the offer went up 100 times with us. National security orders, that was the second one that he listed. And I actually still am not very familiar with them. I think that what they are is that the federal government just shows up and says you got to stop what you're doing because it threatens national security. So you don't even have to apply for a patent or anything. You just you have to stop what you're doing because you are a threat to national security. So I never had that happen to us. That didn't ever happen to us. So that was the one I hadn't heard of before. But another one, the other one he had was patent seizures for national security reasons. And it didn't happen actually to us, but I heard about it plenty. In fact, from my mentor growing up, I heard about this. And in fact, we encountered people who this had happened to them, where they had huge legal battles to keep the federal government from seizing their patents. And so this is, and again, it's all rigged. And so any free energy inventor that tries to file a patent is just foolish, because it'll be seized if they don't reject it. So usually they just reject it, but they can't actually accept it, and then they'll classify it and just take it away from you. And then you go to prison for pursuing your own technology. And then the next one we ever had was financial entanglements with investors. Well, again, both of our companies were stolen in Seattle and Ventura. And in Seattle, it was actually a stock deal. Ventura was more steal all your customers, etc., with dealers. So anyway, so I've seen, and again, all of these issues, I lived through them, and also when I would trade notes with others and keep my ear to the ground on the free energy field, etc. This all is common. This is all part of the playbook. And then legal entanglements. And so, yeah, Ventura and Seattle was being attacked by the legal system, again, fraudulently. Again, Ventura, Dennis shouldn't have survived what happened in Ventura. And then, in fact, in Boston, they were about ready to try to prosecute us criminally prosecute us, but they admitted they couldn't find any laws we were breaking. So, darn it, they couldn't prosecute us because we weren't breaking any laws. This is how our system works. And Greer's next category was credible threats to individuals and or their families. Well, again, our head researcher there in Ventura was threatened by he went into hiding to avoid the witness stand. And anyway, he was threatened into hiding. And again, many people were threatened during what happened in Ventura. Or Sparky Sweet. Sparky Sweet was delivered numerous threats. This is typical. His next category was scientific fraud. And Eugene Malov of MIT and their bearing of cold fusion comes to mind. But we also experienced that when they paraded these experts on the witness stand at Dennis's preliminary hearing who never actually seen one of these heat pumps before. They were testifying how they wouldn't work. Yeah, experts. We never, there were thousands of them in the field, and they never saw one, but they were testifying that, of course, such a contraption would never work. And we had piles of scientific data. So anyway, yes, so scientific fraud. I'm too familiar with that. And then his next one was media corruption. Huh. Amen. Almost since the day I met Dennis, the media smeared Dennis. To this day, Dennis has been smeared for the last 40 years. And again, this was my education, one of my many classes I took on how corrupt everything is. And it was before I ever heard of Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman and his propaganda model of the media. We were attacked by the media. In fact, when Dennis was in jail, I went to work for a medical lab, and the same government media alliance tried to put it out of business when Dennis was in jail. So I was getting both barrels of media. Both my companies were being attacked by government media alliances. And so, yeah, so the media is, I think most people don't need to be convinced too much that the media is just a big lie factory. And so, anyway, and then anything that's related to free energy will get thoroughly smeared. If it's ever acknowledged, it'll just be smeared in the media because the media serves elite interests and the global elite run things. And his last category was wet works, which is killing people. And I said Dennis had a bodyguard the day I met him. Dennis should not have survived what happened in Ventura. And we've heard many, many stories of dead and wounded inventors over the years. Brian had like 25 stories of inventors who came to untimely demises, etc. This is, again, this is common. This is kind of, yeah, they again, and I think Greer lists it last because it's more or less their last resort. So when all else fails, get violent. So this is, and again, my understanding is they're not nearly as violent as they used to be, which is a good thing for what I'm doing. So yeah, I don't expect to die violently. We'll see. I don't expect it, but the media smears. Yeah, we'll see. If I get prominent enough, I'm sure I'll experience some of this stuff again. Be like an old friend returning, have a conversation. So anyway, those are the methods of suppression that Greer discussed. I think that covers the territory pretty well. However, and this is where Greer doesn't touch it, almost nobody touches this, and this is, I think nobody wants to admit it. But so the organized suppression that we were subjected to in Washington state, it was probably mostly the local interests, but it looks like the global elite were also involved. But it was probably more of a local state kind of situation rather than global elite ordering a hit. And organized suppression. So this whole thing of the global elite and all this money and all these very sophisticated means they use to derail any threat, their hegemony. Organized suppression can happen at the city level, county, state, national, global. It can happen at all those levels. And not orchestrated, it doesn't have to be orchestrated from the top because it's all about protecting people's turf. It's all about protecting the turf of the rackets, okay, the economic rackets that run the world. And there's all these subsidiaries. And anyway, so the local electric company in Washington state didn't need to be told by Mr. Big that they didn't need to take care of this guy with this heat pump that would save 85% of what the electric company had been selling. And so, yeah, that's just capitalism. Adam Smith said, wiping out the competition is the essence of capitalism. So this is just how it works. And so organized suppression happens at the global level, definitely. And so they're the best at it. So the global guys are the best. They have, again, they spent at least $1 trillion keeping the lid on disruptive technologies, et cetera. They are definitely the best in the world, but they're not the only ones. And so what we saw in Ventura County, even though the hit was probably given by the global elite, it was implemented by local officials, et cetera. And I doubt many of them, if any of them, realized what they're really involved in. they're a hitmen. So they're just given a job, take these guys out, and they did it, and they got rewarded for it. So promotions were handed all around, and I'm sure under the table money. But they didn't know they were really doing it, to keep the global elite in control of the world economy, which that's what was really going on. And so, anyway, yeah, it happens at all different levels. And so it's a thing where to blame the global elite for all this organized suppression is, I think it's really short-sighted, and it really denies the agency of so many other participants. And this is, and I've written about this plenty. These situations, and I've seen it over and over, and in many different areas, media, also different areas where I see these situations, and I call them 1% conspiracy and 99% complicity. And so, yeah, we're all complicit in this, and then and I've written about this where in Ventura, again, people got their hands bloody, all got promoted. There's all this, again, all these rewards for getting your hands bloody, and people line up for it. They just line up for it, and they don't care if you're innocent or not. They even admitted it. Yeah, one of the investigators said he didn't care if Dennis was innocent or not. He only cared about getting convictions, and he also admitted that he would lie as much as he needed to get a conviction. In fact, the same year he actually said that to us. He was the first president of the Southern California Fraud Investigators Association, believe it or not. So anyway, so again, it's there's so much endemic corruption. Our systems are so corrupt from top to bottom, from end to end. It doesn't take much intervention to come up with the elite serving outcome. In fact, this is Ed Herman's propaganda model. Same thing. It's like just the system will naturally serve the interests of those who control it, and they don't need to be told. In fact, as Noam Chomsky talked about a lot, the system is very subtle in how it works, and it's very, you even call it brilliant. So if you think independently, if you actually don't kowtow to authority, in kindergarten, you start getting weeded out of the system. And so by the time people reach adulthood and go to Columbia Journalism School, et cetera, they're going to report whatever corporate America wants them to report, and they think they're reporting the truth. They believe it. They're so deluded, they actually think they're reporting the truth. And as Chomsky said, there was some New York Times journalists who indignantly said, nobody tells me what to write. And Noam said, they don't have to. You're such a creature of the system, you will hit all the marks. And you don't need to be told what to write because you will faithfully defend the elite interests. That's what they'll do. And so anyway, in fact, I've gone through actually quite a bit of this. But sort of back up a little bit. So when we were in Seattle, in fact, my first big awakening movement was when Dennis had his company stolen as a shareholder meeting. And in fact, John Spicker, the financier who understood what Dennis was doing, who actually, anyway, long, crazy story, but his company was stolen 2 weeks before Dennis's company was stolen as a way to steal Dennis's company. And so anyway, and he was there. In fact, he had this stricken look on his face, which I know the feeling. I know that feeling of being stricken, watching your whole life get destroyed. And when it became evident that these Mormon grifters were successful, this cheer went up through the room. And it was Dennis, and it was obvious his company was being stolen. And in fact, most of the cheer came from Dennis's employees. And they didn't care if his company was being stolen. They just wanted somebody to pay them. And so, and that was my first big awakening moment, was watching all this cheering going on. And again, and when these Mormon grifters who probably worked for the global elite, came to steal the company, the inside guy who engineered it was my boss. He's the one who engineered the theft of the company with the stock transaction he was entrusted to execute, and instead he used it to steal the company. And then when the company was stolen, there was about 10 of us who were I'll call them the loyalists, and there's so-called loyalists, and we were the ones who were like, we're still with Dennis. We were more of the professionals who were left, and we believe in Dennis, and we still want to make it happen, et cetera. But we'd already hadn't been paid for months when that happened. And so in a couple of months, everybody fell out, but me. I was the only guy who was like still on fire. I wanted to be a part of it. In fact, Dennis tried to talk me out of chasing him to Boston. And after 2 weeks of looking for work, I called him again and said, "You got a floor I can sleep on? I have to be a part of what you're doing." So he said, "Okay." And the rest is history. So anyway, those loyalists, only two in the end bowed out honorably. All the rest of them, one degree to another, is back. Four of them trying to extort money from us a year later. And anyway, it was just. And again, and these are the so-called supposed to be the good guys that were left over from the whole thing. And so, yeah, I was the only out of hundreds of employees. I was the only one who really got it. In fact, I didn't even know how the heat pump worked at that time, but I was the only person who followed Dennis out to Boston to help him rebuild, which had been destroyed by the interest in Washington State. And leaving was one of the hardest things I ever did, was actually leaving, because that was my fourth time to try to live there in Seattle. In fact, Dennis later said that Mr. Professor, that my professor who became my partner in Ventura, and he and I are the ones who busted Dennis from jail. We're the only two people, and Mr. Professor's widow, who walked away from the whole thing with our integrity intact. We were like it. We got in deep. And so, and this is sort of one of the points I'm making here, is that to blame, the so-called bad guys and all these corrupt officials, et cetera, is really not giving credit to the rest of us. Yeah, it was like, in fact, in Ventura, when Dennis got jailed with the $1 million bail, I watched our employees steal everything that wasn't nailed down. And in fact, before that happened, before we got attacked in Ventura, our business associates kept trying to steal our company. After I witnessed several attempts to steal our companies, I told Dennis how shocking it was to see, and Dennis said, "The first 50 times I saw it, I was shocked too." And this is the reality. This is the real world, So this is the stuff that people don't like to acknowledge. This they want to talk about the bad old elites and the horrible things they do, and it's like, we have exactly the global elites we deserve, And so this is where, this people don't want to hear this, because it conflicts with their self-regard. And I'll get into this is common. This is normal. This is something I learned. This is typical human behavior. And, our attorney in Ventura, in fact, he was the leading constitutionalist attorney in the United States. In fact, the year before Dennis got jailed, he actually, let's say, won. I'm not sure the word "one" is the right word to use, but basically one of his cases went to the United States Supreme Court. And he actually defended tax protesters. That's what he made a living doing, and other people who were challenging the government. And what happened was that in pursuit of his clients, the IRS actually committed felony acts against his client. In fact, in Ventura, they did the same thing, where they would steal documents from us for evidence. It's like you're supposed to, if you're gonna seize stuff from people, you get a court order, a search warrant, so you don't just steal it. And so anyway, so the IRS was actually stealing documents, encouraging people to steal documents for them, et cetera. And actually, they got convicted. So I think they went to prison. But anyway, so he actually cooked IRS personnel who were after his client. But this is the Bill Rehnquist court, which is notoriously corrupt. And the ruling actually was that, yes, criminals were doing the prosecuting, so the IRS, they went to prison, et cetera, but it doesn't taint the state's case. So the person still had to, so they just put new IRS personnel and keep going. So it doesn't taint the state's case. And actually, to his credit, Thurgood Marshall was a leading dissent on this. He basically goes, if the prosecution is committing criminal acts, okay, it taints the state's case. Okay, you're not going to be able to separate out the evidence when literally the prosecutors are being convicted of felonies in the pursuit of their targets. And so anyway, and so what happened was is that yeah, the Supreme Court ruled that even though the IRS went to prison, for committing crimes, his client still had to stand the charges, and he beat him. But so anyway, and it sort of set a precedent with Dennis's case. In fact, the prosecution kept using in the prosecutorial misconduct hearings we had and stuff. They did the same thing. And in fact, if you read and I've linked to this, if you look at the ruling at this Ninth District Appeal, the federal court, when they dismissed Dennis's lawsuits against him, they basically said that whatever crimes the prosecution committed are totally they're immune. Statute of limitations and prosecutorial immunity. So it doesn't matter what crimes they committed. And it's in black and white. Yeah, so they're just going, yeah, it doesn't matter. So the prosecution can be criminals, and that's fine. This is how our vaunted legal system works in the United States. And so anyway, organized suppression can be at the global level all the way down to the street corner. Two gang members, two rival gangs, over drug turf, same kind of thing. And so they take each other out, and they get up higher, and they just any upstarts, any competition, they just take them out, and then with quite a bag of tricks. And I said the global elite, they got the best bag of tricks. In fact, most of the people that they intervene with don't even realize what had happened. They didn't realize they had been targeted for organized suppression. They just had their lives wrecked, or they died suddenly or mysteriously, and they never figured it out. Not while they're alive, anyway. And for me, and this is what, and this is again back to nobody wants to admit this. Like as terrible as the brunt of the organized suppression was that I lived through, most of the greatest pains were actually inflicted by my friends and family. And this is also common. This is also normal, where your friends and family will attack you. So you're being attacked by the system, and you're being smeared on TV, and your own mother believes the TV over. Don't even ask her son what happened. She'll believe, oh, the TV said you must be a criminal, so you are. And then my mother goes on campaign to my friends, family, and investors about what a criminal I am. I mean, it's happened to me. In fact, by the time she did that, it didn't even hurt anymore. I was so used to this. Yeah, I was getting attacked early and often by people that are close to me. And this was and this is normal. Yeah, what I experienced was not unusual. In this field, yeah, my fellow travelers, when they talk about what they lived through in the organized suppression, they almost all also have to talk about what happened, what their family did, what their friends did, etc. And this is the booby prize, understanding how the world actually really works. And yeah, blaming all the elites is misleading. It's false to do that. But you know what? I actually did find out who my friends were through all of that. So I got friends that are like gold nuggets to me, who were wonderful through all that. So it wasn't all bad, but I have no contact with my immediate family because of my journey. I rescued all of them, and they all attacked me. And it's like, this is what happens if the family heroes, the Boy Scouts. This is no good deed goes unpunished. This is again, this is so common. This is so common, particularly in this field. Yeah, I had relationships I thought would survive anything, and it just crumbled. And that was the greatest pain, I think, of my journey with all those. And in the free energy field, so the free energy field today, and I've written about this. I don't want to talk about too much, but almost 25 years ago, some free energy talking head wrote an article about the free energy field and the problems. And only a third of the article was smearing Dennis. And that article's been handed to me like a dozen times as a premier commentary on the free energy field. And he lies about it again. He's big lies about Dennis, and it's like all these lies, and it's like, but people in the field are like, yeah, this is the good stuff. And this is a string of lies, and people who know better, people who know me, and it's like they still use this article as like this wonderful commentary on the free energy field. It blows me away, and it's lack of discernment, lack of integrity, it's incredible. And these are people in the free energy field, and these are some of the reasons why the free energy field is in a state of arrested development. Yeah, these scoundrels. Yeah, the free energy field's got a fair amount of scoundrels in it. Yeah, Dennis and Brian O'Leary were the only two people I trusted in the free energy field. And there are some other good guys. Mark Cummings, I think, was a good guy. There's some others, but but few of the rest would I actually trust. And I got to see a lot of them show their true colors. It was not pretty. And so anyway, yeah, I really don't have anything to do with the free energy field and kind of don't want to. I don't think the free energy field, today's free energy field, is going to make it happen. In fact, Brian said the same thing in the interview I had in 2009. He said the people in the field today will not be the people who make it happen. That was his kind way of saying they don't have the right stuff. And so, and it's just what it is. It's the thing. And it does no good to judge it. It's reality. It's what we have now. Doesn't mean I accept that the global elite are going to make Earth uninhabitable by suppressing free energy, etc. I'm still doing something, but I also realize that it's quite a bit of train to travel to get to that finish line. And I know I'm not going to get any help from people close to me. Not much, some, but in general, no. And that's normal. And so, yeah, it's people like me. I found others like me, but we're few and far between. And those are the people I'm looking for. Yeah, in fact, when the dust settled in Ventura, I learned my lifetime's greatest lesson, which I resisted every step of the way until it was beaten into my head in no uncertain terms, which is personal integrity is the world's scarcest commodity. But it's also its most precious. Okay, so people who act from integrity are the gold of humanity, or people who act with integrity. The problem for somebody like what I'm doing is that, like my heroes, the Ed Hermans, the Sam Hosseinis, all these people who are these saints, well, there's a million brush fires on Earth to fight, and Ed decided to take on the media. Sam is right now, he's up to his eyeballs in the genocide in Gaza, etc. And so they're out there doing good work. And so, I never convinced, I've never gotten the interest of anybody on the left in free energy, really. I mean, Sam actually, he kind of promotes my work, but he's about it, on the left. And so it's all too strange for the left, conspiracy theories and laws of physics to deny free energy's possibility and all these kind of things. This is part of the problem with the so-called left. The problem with the right is it gets too conspiracy minded, and they want to blame. And to me, it's just tribal. You're blaming some evil outgroup members, and it's like they're the problem, not us. And it's like, no, the problem is us, and facing that is actually one of the first steps to actually doing something productive, is realizing that we are the problem, but we also can be the solution. So, yeah, I've called this 1% conspiracy, 99% complicity. And so, in fact, every so-called conspiratorial situation I've looked into, it's like this. In fact, Ed Herman's propaganda model, same thing. It's structural. Yeah, Ed said there doesn't need to be any conspiracies to explain how the media operates. Even though Ed didn't deny might be some, but he goes, in general, you don't need to invoke conspiracy theory to explain why elite interests are served by the media, because the elite own the media. So, duh. And all this heaping of woes on the global elites also is another cousin to what I call the anything but Homo sapiens hypothesis. Like again, this scholarly scientific denial that humans were violent in the past, that warfare is ancient, or that our ancestors, killed, the world's megafauna. This is all anything but us. As we deny our collective and individual responsibility, or the responsibility of our ancestors. And if we do, how to say it, it is an act of integrity to face up to it, to acknowledge it, and realize that, okay, and then what can we do to make amends? Again, the free energy, my recent video on the fifth epoch, it's like Earth could heal. We could repair all the damage that we have inflicted on the planet. I mean, a lot of species will never come back again, but Earth could be revived into its pristine state in short order if free energy and related technology became publicly used. And in fact, back to the most precious commodity. So people who act with integrity act from love. I mean, that's what that's about. And so, and people who deny these unsavory aspects of humanity, um, because they're defending their own egos or whatever, um, that's a victim mentality, and it's a thing of, and only a creator mentality is going to turn this around. And creators create with love. And this is one of the greatest lessons I learned in my journey is that, yeah, love conquers all. And anyway, that's my little talk on organized suppression and how it works. And again, we all have a hand in this, but we all also can fix this. So that is all I have to say for now.